Hello, welcome to our channel. Our today's guest is Stephen Hayes. He's professor at the Behavior Analysis program at the Department of Psychology at the University of Nevada. He's an author of 45 books and nearly 600 scientific articles. And his career has been focused on an analysis of the nature of human language and cognition, and the application of these to understand human suffering. He's the developer of relational frame theory, an account of human higher cognition, and has guided its extension to acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, a popular evidence-based form of psychotherapy that uses mindfulness, acceptance, and values-based methods. Hope you enjoyed the interview. I leave you with the one and only Stephen Hayes. Hello, Steve. Welcome to our channel.
I'm very happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much for being here. It's really an honor for us. So, Stephen, before we dive into the interview, I would also like to thank you for your famous TED Talk. I will link it below. Yes, a lot of people watching this video have seen the TED Talk. So, but there you share your experience of panic and extreme fear. And you talked about your early chapters as a professor where you felt you hit bottom. And for me, I want to thank you because I believe it's a great way to contribute to end the stigma around mental health and bring to the table human emotions as human, as normal. Because many people come to me feeling embarrassed, feeling guilty, like they have something wrong with them, they have something to hide, they insist on staying anonymous. So this experience, to share this experience, this exercise of authenticity you did there, I think it's amazing and very helpful for people. And they can relate to a role model of a strong, wise, brave, intelligent man who is embracing his difficult experiences, no? He's with pride.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing that people are being more open about their struggles. I would extend it out a little bit. I mean, we've just been through one of the most difficult years in modern history.
Yeah.
And if people didn't know before that mental resilience, mental health, mental flexibility, emotional, cognitive issues are of importance, well, then they know it now, because it's not just the 1 out of 5 who have some sort of diagnosable disorder inside this horrible diagnostic system we live with. It's everybody.
Yeah.
And so, yes, not everybody has panic. That's true. Not everybody has OCD. That's true. But everybody has difficult emotions. Everybody has difficult thoughts. Everybody can get in their own way. And then it isn't, I think this kind of destigmatization shouldn't be thought of just as, oh, 1 out of 5, and don't we have such a sympathy for them? No, it's not like that.
Yeah.
It's humans.
That's it.
Isn't it hard to be human? It's like that.
Yeah. Yes.
And anybody you know that you know well enough from the inside out, you know that's true. And it's only because we're looking at people's outsides that we think that it's not universally true. It's universally true. So
that's it. It's universal patterns, no, of human.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, I have to say, you know, in that context, once you're there, that it's a 5 out of 5 issue, not a 1 out of 5 issue, then there's actually quite interesting benefits that come when you do struggle a lot, because you have a chance to see something that people could ignore or put away or say, oh, that's, and then, you know, COVID shows up, or a divorce shows up, or a cancer diagnosis, or whatever the thing is, and suddenly people aren't ready. I mean, I don't mean this as reassurance, but people who struggle have an opportunity to learn something that everybody needs to know. And so in a way, people who struggle are the lucky ones, because they have a chance to do something really different with what the mind tells you to do with your own psychology.
Yeah. It's a great opportunity, maybe sometimes learned in the hard way, but well, that's personal growth, no? And you experience it, that, no? And you made so much benefit of it for the humanity, the whole humanity. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can get into that as we go forward. But,
okay. So something I find really important in ACT is the role of language. You've made a thorough research into the role of language and how it creates and influences our experiences, our reality in many different ways. So let's play with words. I would like to ask you, what are some words or expressions that clients or psychologists or psychiatrists tend to use that you don't find useful for personal growth?
Well, most of our diagnostic labels are not helpful. I listen for that word have. I have.
Yeah.
Well, have is something that is put upon you.
Yeah.
And do is something that comes from you. Feel is something that comes from you. Think is something that comes from you. So what we've done out of a good heart, but not in a good way, in my opinion, in the developed world, is that we have biomedicalized human suffering.
Yeah.
And we did it with a good heart because we hoped that when you did that, you'd understand where these struggles come from. What are their natural kind of mechanistic course? What are the actual sequences and processes that lead them to become problems and keep them as problems? And what can you do about it? How can you treat them? When you have all that, then you have gone from just a description of struggles that people have to some sort of functional understanding. You understand why, where it came from, how it works over a course of time, and how to change it. Unfortunately, there's not a single one, not one, of the things that we've been taught that we have that have turned into those things. There's not a single psychiatric syndrome, the way, professionals would talk about it, that is turned into a disease. So you have this idea of a latent disease, something in there. It could be genes, it could be your brain, it could be something that makes you have this. Well, and in other areas of health, that has been useful sometimes. And in other areas of health, that has not been useful sometimes. When has it been useful? When it's been useful is when you have a small number of causal factors and when they give rise to a very relatively limited number of physical appearances. And so then you categorize by physical appearances and you really do good research and then you find the underlying cause. So something like tuberculosis, it works great.
Yeah.
A set of things that happen when people have tuberculosis. Eventually you understand exactly what it is, how to treat it. So then not very many people are in TB sanitariums. My grandmother died in a TB sanitarium. That's how close it is to my age.
Yeah.
It's very close. But nobody thinks about this anymore because we understand the disease. But we're 40, 50 years with billions and billions and billions of dollars spent and millions and millions of people walking around inside these diagnostic categories having to do with mental illness and not one example of being able to turn it. So enough already. I mean, how, is 50 years and, how many billions of dollars is not enough? What do you think? Another 50 would do it? It's not going to do it. So here's what I think is the biggest problem that's been put in the culture. And why do we know it's toxic? Well, for one thing, you take the less developed world for which that hasn't happened yet. And they often have very interesting understandings that scientifically wouldn't hold up.
Yeah.
There may be demons, or there may be hexes, or there may be, other kinds of things that are why people suffer, but then when you bring in Western medicine, into Africa or into tribal societies and so forth, everything gets worse. Dramatically, irretrievably, measurably worse. So we know that this conception not only is not giving the benefits, when you take it to people who haven't done it before, it actually harms them. So how about if we just stop?
Yeah.
Enough of already. And instead, let's look at, and this is the Deep Act message, what are the small set of things that people can do that can lead them forward when they're struggling? And what are the things people do that lead them into cul-de-sacs, lead them backwards, lead them into dead ends? And, you know, I have over my shoulder a liberated mind where I tried to summarize about 40 years of work and about 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 studies that distills human suffering down in the areas that we were talking about, but not just that, also with stepping up to the challenge of COVID or dealing with a cancer diagnosis or dieting or exercising or winning an Olympic gold medal. These processes are everywhere in human functioning, and we have a very small set called psychological flexibility that people can learn, and when they learn it and apply it, gradually over time they get better at it, and life begins to open up. So it's not the end all and the be all, but it's a big, healthy head start on an alternative way from something I have to something that I didn't even know that I was doing, and therefore I can do differently.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's, as you say, transdiagnostic. You can use this approach in every human problem and in every human challenge. And also in ACT, you've been decades studying that set of skills, psychological flexibility, that, as you say, they tell more about how human works than any other set of mental and behavioral processes previously known to science, no?
I believe that's true. I think it's the best evidence supported model. Now, in terms of method, you know, usually it'll be a tie with the best or a little bit better. It's really hard to make dramatic improvements. But in terms of the general application and understanding of process, I think the psychological flexibility model and the methods that target it are the best existing set of data, with about 500 randomized trials on the methods and several thousand trials on the processes, and with almost no sour notes, with almost no, something's really wrong. So sometimes the methods aren't very helpful. But then when you keep working on the problem, they get better. So we have to learn how to apply these principles to the individual who has a particular set of characteristics. And that's very challenging. So we know that we have partial answers in how to, and we have a very good working answer on why. And in the history of science, whenever we know the why, we do better on the how to. So, and in fact, that's happening. I mean, if you take something like smoking cessation, just to pick one, you know, ACT was doing as well as anything else in smoking cessation, the best. Well, but now there's a recent trial showing that in the United States, the National Cancer Institute's gold standard method that they use with apps, you know, telephone apps, smartphone apps for quitting smoking, ACT can beat it by about now 25%. It was published in the Journal of American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, and the Centers for Disease Control at the United States are considering implementing it countrywide with money that came from a settlement with the tobacco companies. So we're making progress when we chase the why in specific areas, but we have a long way to go.
But although there's a long way to go and to keep searching for that methods, no, specific methods, we could also talk about the importance of principles versus tactics, no? Because, for example, most of my clients arrive searching or asking for like the technique or the magic trick that is going to eliminate the anxiety, as they are like an isolated thing that is going to to make it work, no? And those clients also tend to use the techniques or the strategies they've been learning at the service of control, and missing the fact that the important thing is why these techniques are working, what is happening inside of my head and my body, no? So, I love how you say that we understand this is logical because people are suffering and they want to get rid of the suffering. It may be logical, but it's not psychological, as you say. I think it's a brilliant one. It doesn't work for as we solve other problems in our life with our minds, no, and our emotions. So, Stephen, how do you teach your audience, your clients, how to distinguish these two concepts, like principles versus tactics?
Well, one reason why the principles are important, I think, is because the tactics, until you understand the principles, will be used for the wrong end. And so the agenda is part of the problem. The purpose of the tactics is part of the problem. Why? Because of what you mentioned, this the effect of human language on human experience. I mean, after all, what you and I are doing right now is just a couple 100,000 years to maybe 2 million years old. It's almost nothing. I mean, and this is an eye blink in evolution of life on the planet. Your body associates things based on operant and classical conditioning, for example, or even more ancient forms like habituation and sensitization, these basic learning processes. You know, we're multicellular organisms that learn to do these kind of learning processes more than 500 million years ago. So part of your emotional response to things that are directly paired, for example, is 500 million years old. What you and I are doing right now is a couple 100,000 to a couple million years old. Well, that means you're sitting atop with this thin cortical overlay, brain systems that are very recent and are trying to deal with things that are ancient. And so, for example, you go into a place where you previously had a panic attack. I know a panic disorder well, so I can use those examples. You go to a place where you previously had panic attacks, maybe even more than once, you're going to have a wave of anxiety when you walk into the door, when you go to the place. Well,
automatically.
Your dog would do the same. You know, your cat would do the same. Now, they don't know about panic, but if they had something really painful happen there and you took them there, they would respond emotionally. And it's really important that they do, because it's how we have survived in terms of avoiding predation and so forth. But what will your mind tell you to do? It will tell you that the emotional response, which after all is just conditioning, it's what you need in the world to be able to recognize that this situation has something to do with your history. It's not voluntary. It's very primitive. I mean, you could hate it or love it. It's going to happen equally well. These cognitive systems now, these problem-solving systems that come in, tell you, oh, anxiety is the problem. I'm feeling so anxious. Wait a minute, who said that was the problem? Anxiety is a problem? Anxiety is an emotion. Now, I get that being, as a panic disordered person, I get that having repeated panic attacks and so forth. If I was having a panic attack right now, it would be more difficult for me to have this interview. But okay, excuse me for living. I mean, if that happens, it happens. You will have an odd interview experience. Your mind tells you, oh no, that would be so awful. It'd be so terrible. No, you have to stop it. How do you respond emotionally when something awful and terrible that you have to stop is about to happen? You respond with anxiety. Okay, so your solution to anxiety is to dump in more things that would produce anxiety?
You're feeding, no, the anxiety and all the process.
So it's counterintuitive what you need to do. You need to rein in the mind. You need to find a way to be more open with your own experience that shows up in the present, what your body does, what your emotions are, what your sensations and memories are. You need to be able to allocate your attention in a way that's more flexible and fluid and voluntary. Find a part of you that's not actually threatened. There's a deep spiritual witnessing, observing, awareness part of you that will be there in the middle of a panic attack, or it'll be there in the middle of a kiss to your most loved mate. You know, it is your awareness will hold whatever is put on it. And from there, can you focus on what you care about and how to build habits around that?
Yeah.
What you deeply want to have your life be about and how to build behavioral patterns around that. Well, those are the 6 flexibility processes.
That's it. You're bringing, no, some of the skills of the psychological flexibility. Can you tell us a little bit, well, you're telling a lot about it, but what are these 6 pivots you have?
Yeah, so the ones I just went through are emotional openness, cognitive flexibility, attentional flexibility from this noticing sense of self, not just from the narrative, conceptualized, idealized, you know, persona that you reveal to others, but just awareness, and then focusing on the qualities of being and doing that you want to manifest in the world and how to make that happen with how you choose to behave in your life's moments. Those 6 things, or you can make it 3, being more open, more aware, more actively engaged in life, or you can make it into 1, being more psychologically flexible. If you flip them over and you enter into, oh, you know, I only want certain kinds of emotions, sensations, or memories, or oh, this thought is so unacceptable, it has to change, or I have to attend it otherwise. And after all, you know, I'm a person who, and then you tell all the stories about how sad you are, how great you are, how kind you are and loving you are, or how deeply flawed you are, whatever the thing is. You climb into a story of yourself and you put life on hold. You know, I'll get to things that are important later after I'm fixed.
Yeah.
After I'm better.
Yeah. When this happens, I'll do this other thing. Yeah.
In other words, I get to sort of put life on hold. Let's push the pause button. Life's not actually really happening because I'm thinking about it and I'm working on it. And when I'm all done with it, then I can start living. Well, that's just nonsense. Every tick of the clock tells you.
Yeah.
Like life is happening right now. What do you want to do?
Or without anxiety, you know?
Exactly. So if you want your life to be filled with anxiety struggles, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
If you want your life to be filled with love and purpose and contribution and compassion and being and, you know, playing and relaxing and contributing and thinking, well, then you're going to need to do something different. So these inflexibility processes are natural, normal, reasonable, and pathological. These psychological flexibility processes are counterintuitive, but very helpful. But they're learnable. They're not crazy. You can test them very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And furthermore, I'd say you already know the answers. You already know that doing this is better than that. There's this one organ in your whole body that doesn't know, and it's the one between your ears.
Okay, so you just said you can test it, because a question that keeps coming from my clients or from my audience is, how do I know at the level of experience that I'm accepting or rejecting or avoiding? Because sometimes I don't know, I'm not aware of what I'm feeling. How do I know?
Well, if you turn it into a rule, you that can then get obsessive about it, you can turn it into another round of the same thing.
Yeah.
And so there's, I would go with the biblical quote, by its fruits you will know them. You know, somehow or another, the rest of creation gets along perfectly well without having to know. You know, and I get that we want to know, it's part of our great abilities, etc. But could we work on knowing in a different way? Could we work on knowing in an experiential way? Could we allow this, I want to know intellectually, etc., to be part of the journey, but not be 100% in charge of the journey? Because you can turn what's useful into another round of more of the same. Like if I say, oh, am I really accepting? You could say, are these really my values? You could say, oh, if I do this, you know, then I'm violating ACT principles. Oh, it's another form of rigidity. Yes.
Yeah, maybe it's an old trick. It seems we are accepting, but it's an old trick again from the dictator within, no? Maybe that part of you that wants to keep solving.
Yes. And so I think it's worth looking to say, but it's also worth having some compassion for yourself. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
You saw, if you go to the TEDx talks that I've done, especially the first one, you'll see a bit about my history, and you mentioned it, kindly mentioned it here. People can find it very easily. But can I tell you that although I had that transformational moment, I developed the beginnings of ACT. I started working with my students. I started teaching it to my clients. Things started opening up. I was still giving talks and so forth and having panic attacks. And early on, I was taking tranquilizers. Then I stopped that. Then I was taking beta blockers. Then I started trimming them down. I wrote in a blog called Licking the Pills, where I kept cutting them down and cutting them down and cutting them down. And eventually, before a talk, I caught myself licking a beta blocker. This must be, I don't know, 5 years into the ACT journey. So one part of you could say, oh, you big fraud. How do you do that? You're supposed to be 100% accepting. But here's the difference, is what I would say, this is going to end. And soon. And sue me if you don't like it. I'm tapering. Yeah. That was a wise thing to do. I did it more intuitively of, no, you don't get to compromise and say, okay, reality, I'll make a deal with you. As long as I get to reject anxiety in this area, in this area, in this area, then I will accept anxiety in this area, in this area. Well, excuse me, you don't get to make that call. Life may say to you, oh, yes, well, here's what's going to happen to you then in this situation. And you may find that it doesn't work. But I think it's perfectly fine to peel the onion one layer at a time. Yeah. None of us are God's gift to psychological flexibility. I am certainly not. Ask my wife. And what I always say to my wife when she catches me, and I say, yes, dear, but you've seen my progress, haven't you? And she always says yes. And they say, and you didn't know me before.
Yeah. Try to imagine. Yeah.
So I'm a work in progress. I'm not, wow. You know, if Oprah Winfrey calls me and wants to talk to me, I'm going to probably pee my pants.
Yes, I read it in your last book, in A Liberated Mind. Yeah. Example, it's, yeah.
Is that okay for us to be on a journey?
Yeah.
And for the speed and complexity of it and so forth to be up to us? I think it's up to us to a degree, but you have to be humbled by that because it depends on the challenge, on the opportunities, on the situation. And so, you know, I might get a cancer diagnosis, you know, in the next day. This could happen. Yeah. I may have an accident happen on the way to the grocery store. Will I be up to that challenge? Yeah. With my flexibility? My flexibility is not just bending. It's strength. It's flexible strength that we're talking about. It's like a physical thing. You know, I have my weight machines in the next room. I'm an old man, but I keep lifting weights. I'll try to keep my muscles as long as I can. But I work on my stretching too. Yeah. I want to touch my toes.
Yeah.
It's the same thing psychologically.
Okay. And strength needs also flexibility. A strength without flexibility is like nothing. No?
Yeah, so we're not talking about random variation. That's not flexibility. Yeah. We're not talking about chaos. We're talking about flexible strength.
Yeah.
And psychological flexibility is that mix of healthy variation, retention of what works, focus on what's important, building your strengths so that you're able to create habits that serve you even when you're not watching it. Yeah. That you're being more mindful, you're being more open, you're being more compassionate to yourself and others, you're being kinder, for values focused. even when you're not watching it. Why? Because you've practiced so much and you build habits in, and you have reminders. You know, you put it into your environment. We all do this, by the way. It's just that when you know what you're doing and why it worked, and we wear values reminders. I've got one right here. What is that thing for? It's just a simple little band. You know, it's to remind me of a commitment I made. And to tell others about a commitment I made. So we can put it into our environment, we can put it into our habits, but we're not the Buddha, we're not Christ, we're not God's gift of psychological flexibility.
Yeah, and understand all of this as a process, and also making room, making space for sometimes we have to accept, we can't accept some experiences, or even when we have, for example, a painful memory or a difficult experience, it's not I accept it or I don't accept it, no, as black or white. And it's I have to, I commit to live this as a process where sometimes I'm going to accept, sometimes I'm going to try to avoid, but after I'm going to be aware of that. So it's that movement, no? And that process.
Yeah, I think it's like that. Even our acceptance skills need to be context bound and purpose linked. We actually found this in the literature. In most cases, emotional openness fits the situation to a degree. But if you look at something like first responders, you know, ambulance drivers, they have to see such horrific things. They see people who have been injured who cannot be saved. And the images you'll see will never leave your brain. You know, the person who's been crushed or their brain has been on the streets or whatever, that will never leave your head. But they need to focus on the person who can be saved. You know, maybe the passenger and not the driver. Well, that requires a certain kind of skill of not now. Now, if you say not ever, what are you going to do with all those memories? You better drink a lot tonight. You know, you're on a road, and we've seen this with police, ambulance drivers, you know, with, you know, essential workers of all kinds who and in the COVID era, we're seeing it right now, where we've looked at the trajectories of who's doing well in the COVID crisis. It was a brand new study, just came out yesterday. Who rejects the public health advice? I'm not going to do that. It's psychological inflexibility. So, but it's not an absolute in a rule-based sense. This isn't like another criterion to fail against. You know, I'm not open all the time. Yeah, duh. But can you? I mean, acceptance doesn't mean open all the time. It means in this healthy and voluntary way to receive the gift that's offered of your own history sufficiently that you're able to learn, progress, and prosper. And, you know, if you get better at it, that's great. But let's start with where you are now, and let's see how far you can go, and not turn it into some sort of 100% or nothing. You know, some of these things are leaps in the sense the quality. Like if I give something to you and I say, here, you accept this. It's full of coffee. If you only half accept it, there may be coffee on the floor. I would like you to receive this gift of the coffee I'm offering to you. Yeah. So it requires a certain level for it to be functional. But that doesn't mean it's an absolute level that's all the time that you then will fail against, because we're none of us are going to be absolutely psychologically flexible all the time.
And maybe one of the steps, one of the previous steps is to learn how to relate with those images, those memories, the importance of thought, no, the meaning of thought, and how you get lost in thought of past memories and what they mean, and even you don't know you are lost in thought, no. So also that skill of cognitive fusion or diffusion, to know how to think and how think is impacting your experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if people wonder then how much is enough there, by your fruits you will know them, because when you can sense very quickly when you begin to open up, come into the present, from this witnessing point of view, focus on your values, life starts opening up. I mean, you can sense that, you can see it. So let's keep working on it. So I think it's a good idea. And this is what's taught in a liberated mind, and what I think good ACT therapists teach, but what the self-help groups and so forth support, is to be constantly working on your flexibility skills. Have a small set that you're getting pretty good at. I like people having kind of like an ACT toolkit with at least one or two things you can do that with diffusion or acceptance or attentional flexibility, etc., that you know pretty well. These exercises, techniques, methods land pretty well. Try to use them as you need them through the day. And then as you find that that's not enough, add another one. Master a small set, add another one, And eventually you'll have quite a number of things that you can do in a challenging situation.
And in your daily life also, no? Not just in a
daily life
situation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think at that point, life is your therapist.
Wow.
And daily life is your exposure exercise.
Yeah. Okay, so Stephen, for me, the most thrilling aspect of all this is to understand why these pivots we are talking about are so powerful. And this is, you explain, because each of the rigid ways, each of the unhealthy patterns we use of thinking and behaving contain a healthy yearning that is hidden deep within it. Yeah. And for me, that's like when someone understands that, they feel like their strategies or the sentence you have, they are doing the wrong things, but for the right reasons, no?
Exactly.
For me, it's like so liberating to think that I was doing that, or I can't quit this habit, and I feel so guilty. But it's because you are looking for something healthy. You are wrong in how you are trying to.
No, exactly. I think our human yearnings, our human needs, our human motivations, we're not so complex that we have an infinite number. It's a relatively small set.
Yeah.
The ones that are in the psychological flexibility process, those 6, plus I think health that needs to be added, those 7, are very sweet things. I mean, they're things that we have as children, some at birth. And when you look at them, there's nothing wrong with them. So I'll give you the example of one at birth. We yearn to belong and connect, and we're wired to do that. I mean, at the brand new babies looked at sweetly by the adults around them, dump natural opiates in their brain. Why would you do that? Why? Well, because we're an evolved species. We're the social primates. That baby needs to know. And it'll actually do it by these reinforcement mechanisms that involve actual natural opiates in your brain. We need to know that we're being seen by kind eyes. And by the way, mama's brain is dumping endorphins too. And so why is that important? Because this baby will need to be cared for. We need to be, that comes when we look at a sweet baby.
That comes so natural from us, no?
So natural to us. And of course, because otherwise, why would we feed and change diapers and do all these things? They cry for years. They don't give us anything except sweet faces. Yeah. But that's enough. Yeah. Because, but what that reflects is a deep human need and yearning for belonging. We need it because we will die without it. We are the species on the planet that has the longest developmental period. We're not like deer. We don't hop out of the womb and get on our feet and start walking away. That doesn't happen. We need to be cared for, nurtured, and fed, and Well, so belonging is life and death to us. That's how deep that need is. And it begins with that moment of eye contact and touch and so forth. Well, when your mind starts get going, your problem solving mind, your analytic, judgmental, symbolic mind, around age 3, you know, as you begin to form enough verbal abilities, things start happening. You begin to lie. 2-year-olds don't lie. They're really hard to get 2-year-olds to lie.
Yeah.
3, 4, 5-year-olds, yeah, they're starting to lie. Starting to lie. By the time you're into, you know, middle elementary school, they're pretty good at it. But never mind teenagers. The data on teenagers is something like 4 times a day. The average teenager lies. If you have a teenager, you've seen it. I won't say what the adults do, but you know, what is inside pretense? What is inside a persona, a mask, you know, that we put on, is the yearning to belong. But the problem is if we adopt a conceptual self, good or bad, that we then present to the world, even when it contradicts what we experience inside, we now, when we attract belonging, don't trust it, don't believe in it, we're not uplifted by it. If you try to get that new boyfriend to think that you're wonderful by, you know, being oh so happy and sweet and compliant and all that kind of thing, you know, and you're actually, you don't like some things that are happening, but you would never say that. If that person comes to love you, you'll say, yeah, but you wouldn't love me if you really knew me.
Yeah, that's hard.
So that means you don't belong, right? Conversely, if it help me, let me in, I'm so sad and pathetic, and the person brings you in, yeah, but you know that the only reason they brought you in is they felt pity or sadness for you, so you have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Which means you can never stand up and be whole and free ever, because the person might leave you. Yeah, and so you see personality disorders getting trapped in that and things of that kind. So my point being, could we be a little kinder to ourselves, that we're, even inside our pathology, we're actually trying to do something that's good and healthy. It's just that that's not the way to get it in a way that plays out in a good and healthy way. Conversely, if we can teach these kind of mindful awareness skills, connecting with us more, witnessing, noticing, the sense of self, meditation, communication, therapy, just in general, the kind eyes of a therapist, drawing the person out into an actual examination of their life.
Yeah.
Well, then you have another possibility of what if I could belong by being with another person consciously and appreciating the conscious connection between 2 conscious beings. That's a kind of belonging that won't abandon you. It's scary.
Yeah.
It is scary because they might see you. They might see through the pretense and the persona. And it will hurt if they left you. Yes, it will.
Yeah.
And you get the joy of connection. So it's worth the risk, because the alternative of getting belonging without connection and by pretense means you never really get what you really yearn for anyway.
Yeah.
You get superficial belonging. Maybe if I'm sexy enough, you know, maybe if I wear the right clothes. Yeah, but you know you're going to age. You know that. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. You are losing the joy of connection, as you say. You know, you don't have that true connection, and at the same time, you are not getting the yearning filled up, no, for you. So you are
you're not satisfied.
In a place of fear, of anxiety, and you can start there with some symptoms like eating disorder or bad habits or worrying all the time, and that's the symptom. But what's beneath that is you are not connecting, or you are not showing yourself, and you feel you have to hide. You feel as
Well,
we said at the beginning, there's something
to
wrong
bring
with
it
you.
to the people who listen to your podcast, if you take something like social anxiety,
Yeah.
these are people who yearn to be with others.
Mm-hmm.
They're not hermits.
Mm.
If they were hermits, they wouldn't worry about the social side of things. Yes, it's not. You yearn to be with others, yeah, and because it's important, there's that anxiety, yeah. Um, Something like panic, we yearn to be able to feel,
Mm-hmm.
but because of our history or whatever, we've been threatened by our own feelings, and we've taken steps to diminish, avoid, control, restrain.
Yeah.
And usually you have a history of that. Most people don't come into anxiety disorders with happy, happy, joy histories. You know, they usually have had things that are traumatic, or places where they've been rejected, or they've had it modeled in their family. Plus, there's a genetic basis. I mean, some people are more prone to anxiety disorders because they have an evolutionarily established ease of associating negative things over larger temporal gaps, which I think explains that cluster of anxiety, depression, and substance abuse that you see in family histories. And so if you didn't get the kind of training as how to be with a full range of emotions and to do that in a healthy way, and you actually saw around you modeled unhealthy things. And if you do have a genetic loading, you probably saw that because your parents and your parents' parents may have not stepped up to that challenge in a healthy way. They may have done things like become alcoholics, or they may have, become OCD, and they may have all these other things could have happened. Yeah. And so you've seen bad models. You have a predisposition. You don't know what to do. You do the best you can.
Yeah.
And that might not be a good thing. It may be something that actually will create long-term problems. So learning how to feel.
Yeah, yeah.
Learning how to feel is a positive challenge. Could we do that on purpose? Could we learn how to feel? Because there's not an emotion you can name that you don't pay money to produce, including anxiety.
Yeah.
You do that. You ride roller coasters. You do. Or you do something. Or sadness or whatever. So they all have a role. They all have a place. But yes, we're going to have to learn how to allow them to have their role in place by reining in this problem-solving mind, and by learning, if we weren't taught in our family, if they didn't give us good emotional training. Oh, you must be feeling sad now. Oh, you must be feeling angry now. If we just didn't even talk about anger in our family, we never dealt with sadness in our family or whatever, you're going to have more difficulty because you have more to learn without help. But, you can have help from your therapist and from these kinds of books. We can go back and learn these things. We're not helpless.
Yes. In fact, in ACT, mental disorders can be redefined as experiential avoidance disorders, no? Like the main process, it's, in OCD patients, for example, clients, you see how they learned, most of them, I'm generalizing, no, but to avoid emotions as anger, no, and they are so afraid of being.
My colleagues and I, Stefan Hoffman and Joe Sorochi have done a study where we looked at all of the functionally important pathways of change with every randomized trial ever done for any psychosocial intervention for any psychosocial problem. We didn't do medications, but any method of therapy for any purpose in a randomized trial that identified the functionally important pathways of change, which in randomized trials, the best way to do that is the thing called mediation. We've looked at the entire world's literature, every single study ever done on the planet.
Hard work.
Okay? Hard work, took 2.5 years, 120,000 ratings. Took a team of 50, 2.5 years to do. We're just now starting to release the data. And here's what I can tell you. Psychological flexibility expanded out a little bit from just classic ACT to include a few additional things that would fit with this way of describing psychological flexibility. that what we need is cognitive flexibility, emotional flexibility, attentional flexibility, this kind of sense of self that is not threatened by content, focus on values, and building good habits. Those 6 things I talked about will arguably embrace about 90% of everything that we know in the history of the world about how to produce positive behavior change. So, and the last 10% with a little bit of modification, it'll actually absorb. So other than medications, if you're just looking at things you can learn and do in therapy, the psychological flexibility model expanded out to not just ACT. It turns out exposure, for example, brand new study just came out, really clear. Exposure produces greater psychological flexibility. Well, why wouldn't it? If I'm deliberately walking into something that is anxiety and provoking and scary, I had to do some degree of acceptance to do that.
Yeah.
I had to rein in my mind when it says, stop, run away. Oh my God, you'll die. I'd had to do a little bit of, Well, it turns out actually some of our classic methods change these processes, and it's part of why they work, even if it wasn't intentionally targeted. So one of the joyful messages of this I can give, and I'm sorry if it sounds too self-focused or ACT-focused, because it turns out all the evidence-based therapies have been playing in this field. They just didn't know it. It turns out that I can say to people, it's a very small set of things that are really important to learn. Work on your emotional, cognitive, attentional flexibility, connecting with this more spiritual sense of self, and then focus on what's important in your life, the qualities you want to put in your behavior, and how to create habits around that. If you do that and then socially scale it into relationships, healthy attachments, into values-based work, etc., you don't just work on it individually, psychologically, you work on it in context, socially, as part of a community, as part of a group, as part of a family, as part of a community, as part of a world. You do that. You put your hands on the energy of life transformation, so far as we know, using Western science tools. And boy, does that help. It just simplifies your task. It's your life task. It's in our wisdom traditions. It's in our spiritual therapy traditions. But now that you know what they are, it's a little easier to focus on them.
Yeah, and why they work. Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, Stephen, you've shared so powerful information, and personal experiences also. Thank you so much for being here. It's a privilege and a great opportunity to be chatting with you. I think we are in time, no? We have to, have to leave to your meeting. Okay, and the last thing I would like to say to tell you is that congratulations for the black belt of your son. I was reading the article yesterday. And
maybe I can explain to the listeners what that is. If they go to Psychology Today, I blog at different places, but I always blog there. And there's a story about my son who had a diagnosable muscle disorder and was basically told he would never be able to achieve physically. And now at age 15 and a half, he has earned, after 11 years of effort, a black belt in mixed martial arts. Wow. And he is a piece of work. He's taller than I am, stronger than I am. And so let's be careful, these clown suits that people are invited to live inside. Oh, you have this disorder, you have that. No, I'm not saying that doesn't have any information, but you are an individual.
Yeah.
And you are very complex. You are not a person to be shoved into a cubbyhole and said, you have this. And then you just stay there. Yeah. No, it's a lie. It's a lie. And let's find out what you can do, even with your OCD diagnosis or with your panic disorder diagnosis. One step at a time, focus on what we know works best. And I tell the story of my son doing that and how it turned out in his life. But if I can mention before you leave, if you're interested in my blogs and so forth, if you go to stephenchayes.com, if you read English and so forth, or can put it through a translation engine, I put my blogs up there. I'll send a newsletter out. I don't spam people. They can stop.
I link it below. And also your latest book. Look, you can see.
Oh yeah. That's very nice.
I've been working.
That's also in my background, and that's the American title, and then you have the British title. They're the same exact book,
It's the same.
Decided to change it.
Okay,
and it's coming. It is coming in Spanish if it's not out already, and it's coming in the.
I don't know. Maybe. I think so. But I prefer to practice my English. No?
But I'm saying.
Yes. I'll search for it and link it below also. Yeah.
It's gonna be on something like 24 different languages. So.
I'm sure you have. They have translated to Spanish. I'm sure. So Stephen, thank you so much. You are welcome to Madrid, Spain. Anyone, anywhere where
I love Spain very much. It's one of my favorite countries. And I've been there many times, and I've many friends there. So thank you for the opportunity. And let me know how I can support your work.
Okay. So thank you, Steve, again, and take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Descubre más de tu mente en hermanoslacasa.com.